the cloud. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Cesare. And I would like to welcome everybody to this ICAR and IDF webinar on frameworks for animal welfare assessment and stakeholder needs. So my part in this is just to give you some background here about where we've come from and why this webinar is taking place. So obviously animal welfare has always been important to dairy farmers, but increasingly we are requiring to quantify or put some numbers or standards on the levels of welfare on farms and in cows to satisfy the retailers and ultimately the consumers. But there are many different schemes going on. So from my perspective in the UK, we have retailers operating systems, we have national schemes, we have all sorts of people, and they're often using many different welfare indicators. But the question is, can we be harmonizing the indicators to maximize the use of this assessment effort? And how do we do that? And here's just a diagram to illustrate what the issue is. We might have a group of cattle on a farm, and many people and many organizations are recording things about their welfare. So there might be a national scheme where farmers are required to submit data or come and inspect cows. There might be a retailer or milk buying scheme. This farm might have to give some information about welfare to satisfy organic standards. The breeding organization might be taking measurements that to do with welfare. And the DHI might also, or dairy herd improvement or milk recording organizations might take information as well. So you can see that the same sort of information is going to many different organizations. And what would be ideal is if we created the same rules for welfare assessment. Perhaps we use the same indicators, the same scoring systems, same data collection systems, and then we could we could all share information. There would need to be fewer visits to the farm and so on. So it seems a sensible idea that we need to really consider now that we've got welfare indicators up and running. And just a little bit of background about where this project has come from. So the ICAR Functional Traits Working Group and the IDF have been working together on the concept of harmonisation of welfare indicators for a number of years. So some of you may well have been kind enough to participate in an original survey of stakeholders to find out what welfare indicators were used. So that was a first step. You know, are people using them? How widespread are they? What are they measuring? And that was back a couple of years ago in 2019. Then we had an internal meeting to kind of decide on how we were going to take this forward about a year ago. And then in June 2020, we had a webinar on introducing the idea of animal welfare and the use of animal welfare indicators, which some of you may have been able to attend. And here we are in February 2021, sorry, I've made a mistake on my slides there, asking, so, okay, now we have welfare indicators and we've established that people are interested in welfare and measuring them. So how do we do that? And we want to ask about what are the frameworks for welfare assessment. So how are people putting the indicators together and how are they framing them to meet their stakeholder needs? And that's where we are today. So the aims of this webinar are to discuss current frameworks and how integration and harmonisations of indicators might be achieved, with a focus on the frameworks that exist and how they relate to the needs and expectations of the organisations that are delivering these welfare assessment schemes. And with that, I would like to introduce you to our speakers today. We start with Leopoldo Stuardo from OIE, who is he's a Chilean veterinarian who has been working in Chile and now for the World Organization for Animal Health, OIE, in Paris. Then we will hear from Sandrine Espiac from ISO, who is a food engineer currently with AFNO, a French organization, but she's also secretary of the ISO Committee on Food Products and represents OIE and ISO on other working groups. Then we will hear from Quincy Lazar from SSafe. Quincy is a management consultant with more than 15 years experience in food management, standardization and certification. He's working as executive director of SSafe, an organization that addresses global supply and trade of food issues, with the purpose being to strengthen food supply chains by driving collaborations. And finally, we'll hear from Johannes Fransen from Denmark. He's responsible from the Danish Cattle Database and Management System, which is a system used by 95% of dairy farmers in Denmark. And his work, or the work of SIGES, is to work with dairy cattle data, how it's collected from various sources, how to validate it and ensure data quality. And he's also a member of many other of the ICAR working groups and the offshoots of those. And here is our program. So Leopoldo will be talking about international framework for outcome-based measure to assess animal welfare. Sandrine will be talking about the ISO standard on animal welfare based on the OIE terrestrial code. Quincy will be talking about animal welfare and global harmonization of these welfare practices. And Johannes will be talking about how to improve animal welfare and health by using relevant data. And perhaps I can just take a couple of moments of your time to point out some organizational aspects. I think Cesare has told you about the Q&A, that it's best to use Q&A to interact with the speakers rather than the chat function. But we would also like to ask for a few minutes of your time to fill out a survey, just to get some ideas about your ideas on harmonization. So it will give you a question about your role, but then also your need for harmonization. Now, should I stop sharing now?
Okay, I can launch the poll to collect the interest of the participants. So the first questions that participants are requested to answer is which group of stakeholders they represent. You have multiple choice, and I kindly ask you to provide your replies. Yes. So 340, 50, 60 people, 80 people, 90. So the most represented group at the moment seems to be the academic, followed by advisory and DHI organizations. So 180, 88, 90, 190. Maybe I'm going to close this poll and the polling. I'm going to share the results. So this is a short representation of the interest of the participants. So the academic and DHI organization, together with advisory service and other groups that are using guidelines, seems to be the most represented group. Okay. While obviously the question regarding the harmonization obviously received quite relevant answers on positive answers. So it is interesting to graphically represent this interest. Okay. Sorry. This is the representation of the harmonization question. Okay, I'm going to stop the poll, and I leave back the floor to David or Marie.
Yes, thank you. I'll just actually, that is, I would like to hand over now to David Kelton to chair, but also to welcome Leopoldo Stuardo to give his presentation. Thank you. I'll stop sharing and then Leopoldo can do that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Marie. Yes, my name is Dave Kelton from the University of Guelph. I have the privilege of being the chair of the Standing Committee on Animal Health and Welfare for IDF, and I'm very pleased to moderate the session today. Again, just a reminder that those of you who have questions, please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom. Please don't put those questions in the chat box. We'll use the Q&A box. And then what we will do is I will view the Q&A box as we go along, and we will hold all of the questions until all of the speakers have had a chance to present, and then we'll have the Q&A session at the end. So with that, welcome to the program, Leopoldo, and we'll turn it over to him.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody. Greetings from Paris. Just the typical question, the screen is a full screen presentation. It's fine. Perfect. Just to check. You hear me well also? Good. Then once again, thank you very much to ICAR and IDF for inviting the OIE to present the experience on this interesting topic, which it's not new for us, and we have been working on this idea of the possibility for harmonize the measures that we use for assess the welfare of the animal, since also the beginning of our work on animal welfare. Then my presentation started as usual with a reminder of what the OIE is. It's an international technical and science-based organization. We are, as much as possible, use the best experts to help us to develop our standards. In terms of longevity, the OIE was created in 1924 and before to the United Nations. And in 2003, we changed our name to World Animal Health Organization, because you know that since the beginning was the Office International de Obstétrique, which is sometimes and in some specific language, it's not means too much. We have the headquarters here in Paris, and we have a network of regional and sub-regional representations in the 5 OIE geographical regions. Now, in terms of animal welfare, which will be my focus, I'm going to leave all the animal health part of the OIE outside. And remember also that the OIE, in terms of animal health, it's quite important because it's a reference organization for the WTO in terms of trade disputes. And not necessarily the animal welfare topic, which is always has been under discussion.
Leopoldo, can you share your screen in the presentation mode for the PowerPoint?
That was my question. I don't know. It's
okay.
It is like it's there or not? No.
It's in your computer.
Yeah, that's the problem.
The classical command for
yes.
landscape.
My apologies for this. I'm going to start. What about now?
Just a moment.
I think
yes, that's much better.
Much better. Yes.
Okay, that's the full screen presentation mode. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, then starting again. Also, in terms of welfare, the OIE As a relatively short story, member countries of the OIE, that remember the OIE responds to our now 182 member countries, established that animal welfare will be being a priority for developing standards in 2001, and in 2002 also there was a resolution during the general session that established also the animal welfare working group was as a group of experts that will advise the OIE in terms of policy development and also in terms of the priorities for the development of the standards. Already in 2016, we started preparing and trying to change a little bit the way that we capture the and work on animal welfare, and we developed OIE Global Animal Welfare Strategy. And this one was adopted in 2017 after the global conference that we conducted in Mexico. And the strategy have a vision of the world where the animal welfare animals is respected, promoted in advance, and ways that complement the pursuit of animal health, human well-being, socioeconomic development, and environmental sustainability, which is a lot of topics that are quite important today, and we are probably going to see a lot of interaction between all these environments like animal health, human well-being, economic development in terms of one health strategy, one welfare strategy, etc. I have put also the links to the strategy in the 3 official languages of the OIE in the slide. And this strategy is based on 4 main pillars. The core work of the OIE, as I mentioned, is the development of the standards, but also we support member countries with capacity building activities, and we try to engage with some partners to support the implementation, and we make an effort to communicate with the government, which are the veterinary service, our main client, if I can say it like that, and other organizations. Then the idea that the OIE it's a global organization poses a lot of complexity in terms of the implementation of the standards, and that is always our I could say one of the concerns in terms of how we can develop standard that which could include scientific, ethical, cultural, and religious and economical dimensions, which we need to take into account if we want our standard to be applicable in a global basis. We are not going to develop standards for Europe or for Africa or for the Americas. We need to have standards that could be applicable everywhere, and maybe that's also a huge challenge for harmonized measures and indicators. Just to recall you that the process of the development of the standards of the OIE, it's quite open. You know that the draft of the standard started with a group of experts, that well-known experts in different areas. That was the case, for example, for the chapter 7.11, the one on animal welfare and dairy care system, production system. And then there's a whole process of commenting in which member countries through the veterinary service, but also organizations that we have agreements, including industry, retailers, animal protection organizations, could also comment and participate in this process until the chapter is prepared to be presented for adoption at the general session, and are the member countries that adopt those standards to become an OIE standard included into the code chapter in the terrestrial code. So far, we have in the section 7 that correspond animal welfare, already 14 animal welfare standards, including the introduction for the recommendation, which is the introductory part of the chapter. going from the transport, the slaughter, killing for disease control, some specific chapters like the controlled stray dog population, the use of animal in education, and then the full new sets of standards covering animal production systems, in which was I include the animal welfare and dairy cattle production system that was adopted in 2015. And the last one also was about the killing method for farm reptiles and the skin and meats. I put an asterisk in some of the chapters that are under revision, and we hope that at the end of the year also we are going to have a process to review all the transport chapters. Then, as I mentioned, the Animal Welfare Working Group was the body of the OE that ended the mandate in 2017, give the OIE some guidance on how we could tackle the development of standards on regarding animal production system. Then for this group was crucial to consider the inputs that are this resource available, and also the management practices, and those are the so-called resource-based measures and management-based measures, which are what the producer or the provide to the animals in terms of hazard or risk factors. Those are presented to the animals, and the animals gives an outcome which is described and specified in terms of how the animal state. This is the animal-based measures, which indicates the animal's welfare and becomes animal welfare's indicators, which are the consequences. The animal production system chapters are the ones that are used mainly this way to develop the standards. The previous ones, I'm talking about the one from transport, slaughter, they use a few animal-based indicators, and they were more focused on resource or management-based measures. Then that is something that we are trying to correct from the revision of the oldest chapter, and also try to ameliorate each day on each new chapter that we are developing. Then, just to give you an idea, this also was included in the introductory part of the section 7, the chapter 7.1, because we didn't have something specifically on animal-based measures and also resource-based measures and management-based measures in terms of how they can be used. Then also 2 years ago, we adopted a new article, which is Article 7.1 on the guiding principle for the use of measures to assess animal welfare. And this also, the idea was to help the implementation on the new document on ISO that Santin's going to talk more in depth. And in this article, we talk about the priority that we give to the use of animal-based measures, the definitions, whenever possible, on different targets and thresholds, also take into account the difficulties that this could pose for some countries in terms of the availability of the data, the possibility to take this data, the possibility to develop a database that could be easily consulted. But also we included that the management and the science-based measures also can be used, but it should be very clear the link between the welfare outcome. Then in terms of a concrete example, I'm going to use the 7.1 chapter on animal welfare and dairy cattle production system. Here is a chapter that I constitute with 7 articles. The definition, scope, some definition on what is commercial production system, and I think the important articles in terms of this discussion is the criteria or measures that were defined for the welfare of the dairy cattle. And according to those criteria, also give recommendations in terms of the system design and management, and recommendations for animal management practices. If we go to some examples, we have in terms of criteria or measures, behavior, which indicate obviously animal welfare problems. In this case, for example, decrease in milk yield, that also could indicate animal welfare problems. Reproductive efficiency in terms of low conception rates, abortion rates, that indicates also health and welfare status of the animal. With this criteria, the standards also develop some recommendations. I'm going to talk about only the ones related to management practices. And we have a set of 17 different recommendations that goes from biosecurity, nutrition, genetic selection, rearing of replacement stock. I'm not going to read everything. And if I take an example, for example, here we in personal training, we recommend that all people responsible for dairy cattle should be competent in accordance with their responsibility and should understand cattle husbandry, animal handling, milking routine, reproduction management, techniques, behavior, signs of disease, biosecurity, and indicators of poor animal welfare such as stress, pain, discomfort, and their alleviation. We also mentioned that competence may be gained through formal training or practical experience. Or remember that we try to develop these recommendations as open as possible for to be used by all our members. And with those recommendations, the chapter define the measures that could be useful to assess the success or not of these recommendations. And then we use the list of criteria that are defined in the previous articles. And in this case, we propose to, for example, look in handling response, morbidity rate, mortality rates, behavior, reproductive efficiency, changes in the body conditions and weight, and changes in milk yield as the indicators that could highlight a problem on the personal training. If this is not necessarily a exhaustive list, we always have that comment. It is the possibility to add, and the member countries could find some other indicators that could be better fit for their own reality, but we encourage them to scientifically support it. In terms of some of the considerations, and this is a kind of summary on how the OIE have been tackling this issue, we always said that the equivalent outcome based on the performance criteria should be taken into account rather to identical system. This is because, and I already mentioned, we are trying to develop a standard that could be used across the globe. Then this is quite important. Also, whenever possible, define the specific targets and thresholds to meet the animal-based measures. And in this case, we encourage member countries to capture that information at the farm level, at the slaughterhouse, during the transport, and also ask the competent authority to try to compile that information and make it available for the stakeholders of their own country. We mentioned already that resource-based measures and management-based measures may be used, but should be defined on basis of the science and expert experience. Because also these are, the tendency is to use more of these measures because they are the easiest to measure in comparison to the animal base, which require more training. Also, the outcome can be measured also using data. I already mentioned this idea. And also, if the outcomes are unsatisfactory, it should be considered what changes to resource or management are necessary to improve the outcomes. And outcomes I am referring to the animals. The last two slides, it's important that, as I mentioned at the beginning, we have been working with some partners on this topic and try to look for the possibility of harmonization. And we have done excellent work, I think, with the ISO in terms of the supporting the development of the TS 34700, which Sandrine will talk later. And also, we have been also having a lot of cooperation and try to develop some initiatives to discuss this topic. The last year, we did it with a joint activity with SAFE, an animal welfare symposium, looking to find some answers on what could be done in terms of the possibility or harmonize these measures. And also participating with, as usual, with the IDF in terms of supporting the development of technical material, as it's the IDF Guide to Animal Welfare, in which there is a lot of reference to the OIE, and we are trying to harmonize terminology in terms of using measures. And for the last slide, I would like to inform you that the OIE, as part of the pillar on communication, it's preparing the third OIE Global Forum, which will be regarding animal welfare and United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Unfortunately, this will be an event by invitation, in which we are going to invite our main partners like IDF, SAFE, ISO, and our member countries. Will be virtual, but for sure will be an event that we are going to record and disseminate publicly. And with that, I finish and would like to thank you very much. Merci beaucoup and gracias por su atención. Over from my side.
Thank you very much, Leopoldo. I'll ask you to stop sharing your screen, and then Sandrine can load her presentation. Again, as we're transitioning, I just remind the participants, please, if you have questions, please enter them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will try to get them answered as we go along. Also a comment, this session is being recorded and the recording will be available afterwards. Thank you. And Sandrine, I'll turn it over to you now.
Just a point from the organizational point of view, I suggest, Leopoldo, there are 5 questions that are strictly related to OIE. So if you can have a look to that and provide a brief reply, otherwise we can move to this question at the end of the meeting. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Do you hear me?
Perfectly.
Perfectly. And do you see my screen?
Can you put on presentation mode?
You do not see my screen?
Yes, we
yes.
see, but I mean, not in presentation.
Oh.
Wider.
Okay. I think it's like Leopoldo. For me, it's okay. It's a full screen on my computer, at least.
Okay.
Is it a problem for you? Because
fine.
No. Okay.
Perfect. Perfect.
Sorry for that. So good afternoon. I'm really happy to be with you, even virtually this afternoon. There are many people connected, so that's a very good sign. Animal welfare is a very interesting topic. Maybe I will start my presentation with a few words on ISO, because some of you are not so familiar with this organization. So ISO is an international organization for standardization. It is based in Geneva, but in fact, it's a network of 165 countries with one standardization organization per country. Myself, for instance, I work in AFNOR in Paris, which is the French standardization organization. So the role of ISO is to develop international voluntary standards. There are so far 23,000 ISO standards. I know it's a lot. And they have been developed with the contribution of the relevant stakeholders, governments, industry, academia, NGOs, consumers, etc. ISO standards comply with the WTO TBT principles, so the World Trade Organization technical barrier to trade, transparency, openness, consensus. It's a very important keyword, consensus in standardization, and impartiality. The votes are made on the basis of one country, one voice. So each country has the same power, I will say, and with and they address the concerns of developing countries. Here are some, what I say, popular ISO standards that you may know. I don't know, the ISO 9001 on quality management, the one on environment, 4001, and the one on food safety, also the 22,000. So after this short introduction on ISO, let's go now into our topic, animal welfare. I have to come back maybe 10 years ago. 10 years ago, there was a cooperation agreement signed between the OIE and ISO. And animal welfare was right away considered as an issue of common interest between the two organizations. And in parallel, there was also a big interest from the food industry worldwide, as consumer awareness on animal welfare issues continues to rise. And you will have a presentation from Quincy from SF just after me to show you the importance of global harmonization. So there was a strong wish, a strong will from ISO, OIE, and stakeholders from the food industry worldwide to have a harmonized international standards on animal welfare. And as Leopoldo said, a global standard, not a standard for Europe and another one for, I don't know, the USA, no, a global harmonized standard. So the initial objectives was very clear. It was to develop an ISO tool, a standard tool for the food chain that would facilitate the implementation of the animal welfare principles of the OIE code. And we took in ISO a resolution in that sense, not reinvent the wheel, not reinvent something new, but take what the OIE did and make a practical tool for the industry. So that was basically the initial objective of our ISO standard. So an ISO working group was created with 130 members from 35 countries from all continents. For example, for America, you had the USA, Canada, Argentina. There was a huge national committee in USA with more than 100 American experts. And it gathered USDA, farmers representative, NGOs, etc. In Africa, we had, for example, Morocco, Kenya, etc. In orange, you see the involvement from Europe, France, Denmark, the Netherlands, etc. In Asia, Japan, Australia, etc. And we had also 10 international organizations involved. The OIE, of course, with Leopoldo and his colleagues, but also IDF, of course, and I don't know, the IMS, International Meat Secretariat, or the World Animal Protection. And this working group was chaired by Dr. François Gary, who's a French vet, and myself, I was the secretary of this working group. We tried to make a representative working group with all the stakeholders, because for such a topic, it's important to have all the point of view, and it's not easy to have a consensus among all the stakeholders, but that was the aim of this ISO working group. So we had representatives for farmers, transport, slaughtering houses, the food industry, retailers, consumers, NGOs, of course. The governments also, we had the French Ministry of Agriculture, for instance, or USDA for USA, and some people from academia also, because it's very important to refer to science, and Leopoldo mentioned it in his presentation. This ISO standard is called ISO TS. TS means technical specification 34700. The title is Animal Welfare Management, General Requirements and Guidance for Organizations in the Food Supply Chain. So you can see in this title a very important word, it's the word management. Indeed, the management approach was preferred to a criteria approach in that standard. And you have to understand management like ISO 9001, the quality management, or ISO 14001. The purpose of this standard was to ensure the welfare of terrestrial animals raised for food or feed production around the world. So in this standard, we do not deal with aquatic animals, only terrestrial, and we stay focused on the food chain. So we will not speak about animals used in research labs or stray dogs, no, only the food chain. The objectives were first to provide a tool, a management tool for the implementation of the animal welfare principles of the OIE Terrestrial Animal Health Code, to provide guidance for the implementation of public or private animal welfare documents on relevant legislation, but that needs at least the OIE principles. That means OIE is the consensus, the basis. You can go beyond, but you cannot be below all the work from the OIE on animal welfare. Third objective, to facilitate the integration of animal welfare principles in business-to-business relationships, so between suppliers and customers. So you have to understand the ISO standard as a standard for B2B relationships. And last thing, the scope was limited to topics for which an OIE technical chapter was adopted. So it was 4 years ago in 2016. Because yes, the consensus was to take the OIE Terrestrial Animal Health Code. So the general principles of animal welfare in OIE, section 7.1, and Leopoldo explained it, with the 5 degrees of liberty that you all know about. And the relevant OIE other chapters for transport, land, sea, air, slaughter, and the 3 sectors, beef cattle, broiler chickens, and the one very interesting for you, I think it's the dairy cattle production systems. So all those chapters are covered in the ISO standard. And this standard was published 4 years ago in December 2016 for the OIE, the last OIE Global Conference on Animal Welfare. It was in Mexico. Maybe some of you attended this conference. Yes, it was a time when we used to travel and to see each other. So now you know about the objectives of this ISO standard. let's go now a little deeper in the content of this document so that you understand a little bit more how it works. So firstly, very important, the standard applies to who? It applies to an organization. We deliberately chose the word organization because it's large and flexible enough. Organization, it can be anything, it can be a business operator, it can be a farm or whether a group of farms, a crop, a transport company, a slaughterhouse, etc. And how does that work? The principle is to help the users to assess their situation. So it is a management approach, like in ISO 9001. You will start first with what we call a gap analysis between your organization's current animal welfare situation and the OIE standards. The documents that will be used to do this gap analysis, of course, the OIE chapters, but you can use also other documents than the OIE sections, as long as they meet at least the OIE terrestrial animal health code. So it can be animal welfare manuals, it can be some codes of practice. For example, in France, the dairy sector have some good practice that can be used. It can be also protocols from competent authorities. So at least they meet the OIE code. Then once you have your gap analysis, it's the second step. You develop a plan to address the gaps you identified. And this animal welfare plan shall identify several elements, some relevant indicators, what you need as far as competencies for animal handlers are concerned to ensure appropriate animal welfare conditions. Okay, then once you've got you draft your plan, then you implement it with the required resources. You have to think about the resources you need on equipment, material, housing, facilities, human resources. And the last step is to evaluate your plan. It's like the basic principle of quality management, like PDCA, if you are familiar with the quality principles. PDCA means plan, do, check, and act. So you have to check. The objective is to evaluate the effectiveness of your plan and to review if improvements are needed. Even if this ISO standard is based on a management approach, the working group members wanted to have something in this standard about criteria. So there is an annex, it's a purely informative, to explain how you can determine some threshold for animal-based measures. So you will not find figures in this ISO standard, but rather a methodology. So this ISO standard can be seen as a bridge between the public sphere on one hand and the private sector on the other hand. What I call public sector is the public policy used by veterinary authorities of importing and exporting countries, and the private sector is the industry, the private schemes, the best practices, and so on. So it's a bridge between the two worlds. What could we say as a conclusion? First of all, 4 years were necessary to build a consensus between all stakeholders to publish this ISO standard. So it was not an easy task, really. It was a huge work, but necessary, because now we've got a harmonized standards between OIE, ISO, and the food industry. So it's a joint effort between the three organizations, ISO, OIE, and SAFE. And it's a global standard. It's not a standard for one part of the world. Secondly, indicators are of course necessary, but they are not enough. we really need a management approach to assess that animal welfare is always ensured, whatever the conditions are. Sometimes we've got bad conditions, weather conditions, infectious disease, a drought, a peak activity in slaughterhouse. So we need this management approach complementary to technical criteria. And thirdly, there is a question of the assessments. There is probably, I say probably, a need of certification to give trust to the consumers. We have several requests in France for companies who want to be certified with this ISO standard. Usually those companies all work at export, and they are already certified for other ISO standards like ISO 9001 or ISO 22000. So they are very interested in the management approach, which is developed in ISO 34700. So, well, I thank you for your attention. And of course, I will be happy to answer any question in the Q&A session. And I will give the floor to Quincy.
Thank you very much, Sandrine. While we switch the projection over to Quincy again, I will just remind the participants, please put your questions in the Q&A box. I will also ask our panelists to review the questions that are in there. Some of them will you'll be able to answer just by typing in a response there, and that way we can address some of the issues that are that come up as we go. So thank you very much for that. And with that, I will turn the presentation over to Quincy Lissauer from SAFE.
Thanks, David. David, just a quick sound check. Can you hear me okay?
Good.
Yes,
we can hear you well.
Yeah.
You may want to switch to presentation mode. What we're seeing is your sort of your side screen, I believe.
Okay, it should be in presentation mode, so it may just take a few seconds to load up. Can you let me know when it is in presentation mode? Well, while it's going into presentation mode, at least I hope it will, because it is on my screen. Good morning from Medellin, Colombia. My name is Quincy Lissauer. I'm the Executive Director of SAFE. I joined SAFE as its Executive Director in 2013. We are a small global nonprofit organization incorporated out of the US. However, we are global in our scope and our activities. We were founded really to work on issues to help protect human, plant, and animal health under the One Health concept. Back in 2003, 2004, we came out of the avian influenza crisis in 2003, and in dialogue with OIE, came up with an idea to form a public-private partnership that brings together the private sector, intergovernmental organizations, NGOs, academia, and other interested parties that want to work on strengthening the safe supply and trade of food around the world under the One Health concept. We are a membership organization. We have 11 members covering virtually the entire food supply chain from farm to fork, all the way from primary production and animal production with companies like Cargill and Tyson, some ingredient producers and manufacturers, big food manufacturers, and then on the consumer and retail side as well with companies like Compass and McDonald's. But really the core about SAFE is that through our members is the alliances and the partners that we work with. Obviously OIE, who we've had a relationship with since the founding of SAFE in 2003, 2004, also FAO, Observer Status in Codex and in ISO, and obviously with ISO we'll go into a bit more detail further on, as well as what has already been spoken about by Sandrine. STDF, which is part of the WTO, ICAR for Latin America, and then numerous academic institutions, as well as GFSI, the Global Food Safety Initiative. SAFE has basically been working in the animal welfare space for approximately 10 years. As Sandrine said, between SAFE, OIE, and ISO, we work together to bring this tripartite together to look at how we can look at harmonizing as well as providing guidance and support for the implementation of good animal welfare practices around the world. And really, we have 5 key components that we believe in and that we support when it comes to animal welfare. First and foremost are the OIE standards. We believe that we see OIE as the base for good global animal welfare practices, as well as the 5 freedoms as set out within their particular standards. We really want to make sure that animal welfare requirements do not restrict trade, and as such, that animal-based food products can move easily across international borders. That in turn has an impact and effect on food security, making sure that there is enough food available for the global population, as well as nutritious food. I think that goes to answering one of the questions that I saw in the Q&A earlier from Freddy Garcia. One of the things that is very important with regard to harmonizing animal welfare standards and animal welfare practices is not to eliminate diversity as such, but it is important to ensure that there is a common baseline so that we do not restrict trade in animal-based products. Thirdly, we really encourage the private sector to, and private sector globally, particularly in developing markets, to align with and meet OIE's guiding principles and standards on animal welfare. Again, it ensures good animal welfare practices, it ensures good animal health, and again, it helps to support international trade of animal-based food products. Fourthly, to promote the adoption of ISO TS 34700, which we see as a very practical tool and helps to promote good animal welfare practices around the globe. And finally, as Sandrine already mentioned around certification, we are supportive of certification programs, but we are a strong believer that they need to be aligned with OIE standards and in order to help strengthen both consumer confidence in the food chain generally and animal welfare practices within that food chain specifically, as well as driving global harmonization of science-based principles in animal welfare. I'll touch on that global harmonization of science-based principles a little bit further on in the presentation.
Sorry to interrupt, Quincy.
Sure, please.
Sorry, can we ask you to try to reset your screen share? We're still just seeing the secondary screen with your.
Okay. Let me see here. But at least you could see something, right?
Yes.
I hope.
Yes.
Okay, that's good.
There we go.
I have to reset it into full screen. Did that go?
Yeah, no, that looks good. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. No worries.
Oh.
If it
Can you get
again,
closer?
please
Can you get closer to the microphone, possibly, just to improve the
Sure.
sound? Yeah, thank you.
Sure, no problem at all. No
Oh
problem.
yes, much better now. Yeah.
Okay, good. Right. So when we then take a look at how the food systems globally are governed, and this is an important high-level conversation that I just want to touch on briefly. From a global governance perspective, an international governance perspective, really the fundamental elements that manage the safe supply and trade of food around the world, all the way from farm to fork, are set out in codex by the three sisters, FAO, WHO, and OIE, for human health through food consumption, OIE from an animal health perception from an animal health perspective, sorry. And for plant health, we've got the IPPC, which sits within FAO. And then finally, to ensure trade, we've got the WTO. What does that mean? Well, that really forms the basis then ultimately from a global to a country infrastructure perspective through science-based standards, laws and regulations, as well as very strong and fundamental inspection and compliance networks through labs, inspectors that verify and ensure compliance. However, on the other hand, and this is all interconnected, we also have international standardization that provides guidelines and recommendations that help and support the science-based standards that form country infrastructure laws and regulations and science-based standards, of which ISO is an absolute fundamental part, as well as business initiatives. So within the food space, we've got GFSI, the Global Food Safety Initiative, and their benchmark systems. You've got management systems that can be accredited, certified against, and provide strong implementation support and transparency. And finally, you've also got private programs and schemes. And what we have seen, at least within the animal welfare space over the last 20 years, is a significant proliferation of different programs, private. I'm not going to go into a debate or discussion around what may initiatives, international and countries, all can play a key role in ensuring that good animal welfare practices are adhered to the world. What lessons can we take then from the food safety space? Really, I've outlined 4 here. Firstly, we have seen public-private partnerships like the ones that SSAFE works in, but we're definitely not alone in this space, benefit the food system as a whole, particularly because it helps bring together regulators, the private sector, and consumers. Secondly, that it is fundamental for there to be private sector alignment with official standard setting organizations. And again, the work that Sandrine and ISO have done is a great example of that, where we're basically looking at the official standard setting requirements out of OIE, and then trying to align that with practical ways within the private sector through a technical specification, ultimately enabling supply chain assurance and strengthening supply chains, as well as facilitating international trade. So on that ISO point, we see ISO serving a very important role in establishing continuous improvement through practical tools, their particular standards, which help the private sector function more effectively and efficiently. And then the fourth key lesson that we have also out of the food sector is that independent benchmarking and good governance mechanisms are really needed to help establish equivalence and global acceptance of private accredited certification schemes. We are a big supporter of certification in specific areas, so long as they're accredited, they're global, and they really form a good benchmark that provide equivalency around the world. I did have a slide in here, which is the next slide, which is on the value and the impact of ISO 34700 and some of the benefits within that. I'm not going to labor on this because Sandrine already covered pretty much all of this in a really good and effective way. I think if I just pull a couple of these out, we obviously are very pleased that ISO 34700 really ensures that and demonstrates that the OIE's principles are the base for global animal welfare. It enables benchmarking and transparency. It helps provide guidance around how to manage the welfare of your livestock. It is obviously underpinned by the principles of the Terrestrial Animal Health Code and improves environmental animal care and the management of livestock. However, we do recognize that there is a need for some more work in this particular space. We have spoken to numerous stakeholders throughout the years in our collaboration both with OAE and with ISO and Sandrine, and we do recognize that more work is necessary because it hasn't solved the entire puzzle. So SAFE and OAE ran a global animal welfare symposium last year to really look at where the future of animal welfare should be going. We brought together 40 leading experts and stakeholders in the animal welfare space. And what really has come out of that, and although these aren't final conclusions yet, but it starts to give an indication as to where some of the challenges are and where we can make some big differences going forward, I have 6 key principles here. First, and it was good for us to bring the symposium together in that it brought together a multidisciplinary stakeholder group, and I think that the group as a whole recognized the importance for multiple stakeholders from around the globe, from different aspects and different perspectives of the animal welfare space to come together to harmonize global animal welfare practices. Secondly, it is important to recognize that there are significant regional, economic, cultural, and religious differences around the world that have a major impact on how good animal welfare practices are locally and can be implemented, managed, and monitored around the world going forward. This is an important point because, and again, it comes back to Fede Garcia's question as well, around diversity. There's definitely diversity in terms of culture, religion, economics, infrastructure, and other regional climatic differences as well. So those need to be taken into account as we start looking at how we can drive some harmonization going forward. Thirdly, there's definitely a need for us to continue to focus on outcomes-based principles that are based in science, a lot of which Leopoldo already outlined earlier today. However, we cannot ignore the fact that there are also inputs that we need to look at, i.e. the measures themselves, and how we're going to manage those measures going forward. Fourthly, it's fundamental for us to identify, develop, and implement a common harmonized base level for good animal welfare practices. Because of the differences around the world, we know that in certain parts of the world, there are stronger, higher level beliefs and requirements for animal welfare principles in particular regions. However, there is definitely a need for a common baseline from which we can work everywhere around the world, ultimately, obviously, protecting the welfare of animals. We also believe that there is a need for a balanced approach between science and practical on-farm practices that address local implementation challenges within their specific context. And this is very important, again, to help drive harmonization going forward. And then finally, there are fundamental differences between species. And again, yourselves as dairy experts know that some of the challenges that we face in animal welfare in the dairy sector are different than they are in beef production. They're different from pork production, sheep, goat, even aquatics as well. So because of those fundamental differences, we do see that there, over the long term, is going to be a need for a common base that can ultimately then be supported by individual additional species-specific implementation guidance. To summarize then, as I say, what is our ultimate goal? Where do we see this going, and what would we like to see in the next 5 to 10 years? As a continuous improvement in animal welfare practices around the world through global, harmonized global standards in animal welfare that are supported by the key stakeholders, government, industry, and consumers, and that are developed through scientific research, outcomes-based, support international trade, and ultimately provide true welfare for food-producing animals. that is it. My contact details are here on the last slide, and I do look forward to the discussion and answering any questions that any of the participants may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Quincy. Again, I will remind our participants to please enter their questions in the Q&A box, and I'll ask our panelists to answer those that they can through the Q&A box. You can type an answer there. Looks like we're going to run a little bit tight on time at the end, so we do want to get as many of those answered as we possibly can. With that, thank you very much, Quincy, and we'll turn the program over to Johannes, who has the last presentation in the series this morning.
Thank you. My mic is open. Do you hear me? And do you see my screen?
Yes, we hear you and we see your screen. Thank you.
And it is in presentation mode, I hope. So thank you for the invitation to take part of this. And then I would say now to something quite different. I've been asked to give a short presentation about how to improve animal welfare and health by using relevant data. So now I'm going to present how we do that in Denmark. So it'll be examples from practical use, so to speak. And I'll try to do it as quick as possible in respect of the time. So this is where I'm working. This is SICAS, and as part of a big innovation and food park in Denmark, actually where we are trying to work from farm to fork, so to speak. We do have our innovation center here. We have Arla Innovation Center here, and we have our breeding organization placed over here. And even out in these fields, there's now an University of Aarhus have their food innovation center as well. Well, and who am I? I'm Johannes Fransen. My official title is Product Portfolio Manager for Cattle, which means I'm responsible for our dairy management system and our central cattle database, used by almost all the dairy farmers, the different kind of advisors working with the farmers, and veterinarians servicing the farmers as well. I'll do this a little quick, and to see what do we do at SICAS. And we are sort of a farmer-owned organization doing innovation, doing education, doing digital tools for farmers within all dairy, all farming businesses, so to speak. And yeah, I'm working in our digital department, as I said, responsible for our dairy tools. So DMS, what is that? That is a very comprehensive tool which contains sort of all the different kind of aspects you're using and needs for managing your farm, which means the registration, daily management. We have different kind of KPIs and benchmark. We have sorry, different kind of production analysis, feeding management, financial reporting, etc. We do have quite a huge connections to different kind of dairy source data sources. Sorry, and we also have the national cattle database, and it is used by the farmer, the employees on the farm, the veterinarian, the advisors, and dairies, and other kind of stakeholders working on doing services at the farm. Another more schematic overview is that we do have the central cattle database here with all the data, all the raw data. We are responsible for the mandatory data recording on movements in Denmark. So we do have a cooperation with the authorities. We have our DMS. We have a smartphone application. We have a touchscreen application for the barn. We do have a tool for the claw trimmers, also used by some farmers to enter data on claw health. We do have all these integration to external data. Our breeding company Viking, our milk recording system work, our different kind of different dairies, slaughterhouses, labs, different kind of veterinarian systems. EATAC manufacturer is not so important in this connection, and then actually a lot of connection also to processing equipment. The important point is that all data is stored, all raw data is stored in this central cattle database, and we do calculate a lot of key figures actually each night on the newest raw data, and they are all accessible to the DMS system. And the point is that we do only have data stored in one place, in one database, and no matter which system accesses data, they all access the same raw data and the same refined data and key figures. It's also important to say that data, we consider data to be owned by the farmer, and nobody access data without a permission from the farmer. So how do we use that, and how do we do that in Denmark, and what is actually animal welfare and health? We look at it this way, that data for animal welfare and health is a part of the management for the farmer, as we also see that nobody actually wants to register data, especially not for the authority. So we try to pick out as much value for the farmer in these data. And actually we find that the better welfare, the better health in the animal, the better condition of the animal, and the better they are producing, and better economy, and better the better the mood is for the farmer. So what is then the data we think as animal welfare and health? As of course the health registration divided in these different categories. There's mortality, where we calculate a lot of key figures on different age group, and also during the lactation cycle. Milk production, is that a welfare or health indicator? Yes, we consider both yield, fat and protein, and especially the ratio, and somatic cell count to be part of this data package. We do get registration from the slaughterhouses when the veteran on the slaughter line find lesions in the body, and then we also do have some welfare registrations, not on all animals, but part of the animal in the herd, since that's mandatory for the farmer to get this on body condition score. Hair and skin, lameness and damages, they do get a score on that as well. So, and all these data we have in the same database. And then a bit of what I call data flow, health related. So how do we get data on that? We do that because we have an advisory system that allows the farmer to use medicine for treating the animals when he recognizes a disease, but it requires that there is a diagnosis to do the registration on, and we get all that data in the database. I'll just briefly try to demonstrate the flow of data here. The veterinarian prepare, visit, go to the farm using reports from the DMS system. We visit the herds, register clinical observation. He describes diagnosis, herd diagnosis. Then the farmer are able to treat animal. But when he treats animal, the treated diseases and the amount of medicine is recorded in DMS. And because DMS is also used to calculate the medicine usage, which is mandatory to do. And then the farmer and the vet can do follow-up and benchmarking. We do have different kind of calculations and systems for that. And we have different kind of output that I just are going to show you a few examples of. And the first one will be in English, but I have to put in a disclaimer that later, yeah, I will, I'm sorry, our software is only in Danish, so there might be some Danish words as well. But we do have a daily overview, which is very much used for the farmer. Almost half of the dairy farms in Denmark look this up daily, where he get a daily overview. If it's green, he's sort of on track. If it's red, he might need to do something about it. And that will be within milk, reproduction, health, and feeding. We have in total close to 20 key performance indicators we show here. And behind each parameter, we do have a report showing the development over time. Another one is now I'm sorry, it's getting into Danish. We do show we are starting to use a tool for dynamic analysis. You might know that's a tool from Microsoft called Power BI, where we can display data. And this is all disease registrations here. In this tool, it's possible to filter between them. I can't show it here, but in the program, if I choose the upper one, it will only show data from that specific disease. Up here, we can filter on category of diseases, all the different diseases, days from calving, lactation number, period, last 12 months, 12 months before. And even if you have groups in the herd, you can divide it into that. Over here, we display how many animals we're talking about and how many disease recordings we have. And here we show the development in days from calving. Oh, yeah, the different groups here and the days from calving. Another output is a benchmarking system. Well, just shown taking a few out related to health and animal welfare. It's always good to know the number of animal, of course, and the yield. And then we can see the, for example, the nutritional diseases, where this is the ratio 0.19 which means 19 out of 100. The reference value will be the period before. It was much higher. We can see the rank that it's actually quite high because it's out in the red area, number 1100 out of 1412. And so the farmer can see, well, here might be some improving potential, and we'll show that for other diseases as well. We show, if you go deeper into it, you can see the development over time, but during the time I will try to move on to another kind of graph we show. This is for heifers. This is when they are born, and for a specific period, we can see this is the white area is the heifers that has not calved. The red area is the dead one. The dark green, blue, I don't know, is slaughtered, and then the light blue is the one who has calved. So here the farmer can see how am I doing? When do they start calving? When do they die? And I can see here that at the first calving only, you could say 84.5% of the heifers are still alive, and there might be improvement potential here as well. We do kind of the same for dairy cows, looking more at what we would call the longevity. And see, this is when they start calving, first lactation, second lactation, etc. And then we can see when they are dying and how good you are producing. You see after first lactation, I mean, the red one is still the dead one, and the blue one is the slaughtered one. After first lactation, only 74% or something like that is still alive, and that's actually a bit below average. We know average is around 80. So also here you can see the farmer and the advisor can look for improvement areas. And a question a lot of people ask within the dairy business: is there any economy in keeping the cows alive so long? We have done some comparison to the economical system and actually found that when you look at all breeds, the cost per to produce a kilogram of milk, the average was 2.46. For the 10% with the highest longevity, the average cost to produce a kilogram of milk was 2.41. And for the 10% with the lowest longevity, it was 2.58. The green one is for biological herds, and you can see the yield, etc. here. But in respect of the time, I will try to stop here. Just a very short presentation of how we are trying to use and get value out of these health and welfare parameters in Denmark. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Johannes. So we are very rapidly approaching the end of our scheduled time here. We've had a number of excellent questions that have come through the Q&A box. And again, our panelists have been working hard to get those answered. Johannes, there are a number of questions there now, I think, that are very specific to your presentation that I'd ask you to perhaps have a look at some point and respond to. Looks like we do have a few folks that weren't able to type in questions, but are quite keen to ask some verbally. We've got 3 hands up. Since we've got a couple of minutes left, I will invite those questions. The first one is from Floro Donardo. I will ask you to unmute your microphone if that's possible, Cesare, and to ask your question. Please indicate.
Yeah.
Please indicate to which panelist the question is to be asked. Thank you.
Florio, you have the floor now. It disappeared.
You will need to unmute your mic.
I asked Floro to unmute the microphone by the panel, but it seems that anyway, there are a couple of questions also in the question and answer section. Most of them are related to last presentation by Johannes. So maybe I can present one regarding the use of the information to guide genomic and genetic selection objective, how this can be achieved. The question comes from Johan Detilleux.
Oh, I will try to, this is the question, to use information to guide genomic and genetic selection. Yeah, we do. We do use the health registration in our for our development of the breeding evaluation. It's used there. Of course, they will have different impact on the breeding. Some will be of more environmental character, but we use them. We use them also for the breeding evaluation, if that is what the question is about, and I think it is.
Okay, so another question is also related to the use of indicators. So do you use any indicators based on animal behavior changes? Same question to Johannes.
Yeah. No, not on animal behavior changes as such, but the welfare registration that I showed is done by the veterinarian and is done by a kind of standardized scheme, but it is not for the animal behavior as such, but it includes, besides lesion, also, yeah, as I probably said, lameness and etc. But we do not, as such, have indicators for animal behavior changes.
Okay, and are you also looking at indicators that are not directly associated with biological functioning, but related to the natural behavior or affective state of the animals? The question from Christine Picard to Johannes.
Yeah. No, I can't say we. I can't. Well, we're probably looking at it. I would have to go back to my veterinarian colleagues, but not right now implemented in the system.
Okay.
So there's a question here in the Q&A box from David Chamberlain for Quincy. He says, I can see the benefits from having a harmonized system, but perhaps there should be various divisions or bands within them based on regional, cultural, and economic challenges. Quincy, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, so that is the ultimate challenge, right? And I did mention during the conversation that is potentially one of the solutions going forward. The big problem, the big conflict really is between what is a common baseline and how far do we want to take animal welfare. We know the expectations from consumers in certain regions of the world are different from other regions in the world. And those expectations obviously need to be met by food producing, by food producers with animal-based products. Nonetheless, the element of trade, food security, animal health, and other elements need to be considered as well. So one of the areas where we are thinking is, what is the baseline? And then is there some sort of system that you can build upon from that baseline for higher level, more advanced, good animal welfare practices that can then ultimately also help drag others along over time, because you're not going to be able to change everybody everywhere all at the same point due to infrastructure and cultural differences as well as investment challenges.
Another question here, and again, this may be to any of the panelists. What are the plans to use any medical devices or sensors in terms of any of the standards or programs moving forward? I know whether, Johannes, you want to talk about how some of the sensor data is incorporated in your system, or?
Yeah. I don't actually know where to start, because when we're talking about including sensor data in our system, we are sort of on not so solid ground, so to speak, because we're not able to verify the validity of data and the quality. We are totally dependent on the sensor. So any kind of standardization of some just to some extent would be nice to have that, because we are looking at getting these data in, and because the farmer would like them to be in the system, and we would actually also like to do some evaluation on or use them in our presentations, but we are totally dependent on the quality from the sensor, the specific sensor system.
Any of the other panelists want to weigh in on that one? All right, perhaps we'll try one more oral question. We've still got a couple of hands up. One is from Mark Niederkorn. I don't know whether, Mark, if you can unmute your microphone, and if you've got a question, please indicate which panelist the question is for.
Hello, David. You have been upgraded to the panelist, so you can express your question. We cannot hear you. Maybe.
I don't know. We seem to have lost Mark. All right. Not hearing anything, so we'll maybe try. There's one hand still up. Let's try Christine Picard.
Okay. Maybe we can take a question from question and answer.
Can I ask Cesar, is it possible for me to answer the question?
Yes, please.
For me in the after the session? Because it would be easy for me to have some time to answer them, and I will do that right after the session. Will that still be visible for the participants, or how will that work?
It seems that we lost David. So, okay, I take the initiative. Another interesting question is a question coming on the guidelines on how to set selective objective to improve the welfare. Is there a way to propose these guidelines in somehow? Can some of you provide an answer? Maybe Johannes?
Sorry, I didn't get the question.
So do you also propose guidelines on how to set selection objectives to improve the welfare?
Yeah, our veterinarians do. We do have guidelines to how to improve the welfare. If that's the question, the veterinarians are working with that.
Okay. Let me see some. Another question is from David Chamberlain. Do you have for Johannes? Do you have templates for recording of pathological lesions that are discovered by attending veterinarians at the abattoir?
Yeah, we do. There's a template that is used in the slaughterhouse or the abattoir for the veterinarians. That's a mandatory sort of, I don't know what it's called, control of at the slaughter line to control the meat, and that's done by a defined scheme how to do that.
Okay, and there is one question more for Leopoldo from Jaime Cubides Cardenas. Why isn't there a chapter for small ruminants in the code? And how to standardize the code with protocols for the organizations such as Certified Human or Global GAP?
No, I did something wrong in the Q&A, and it was mentioned that I wanted to answer directly, and then
Okay.
I sent a message already to Jaime, but it's just to we have been working on the priorities that the Animal Welfare Working Group proposed from the beginning of the OIE animal welfare work, and now we need to start again looking for those species that have an important importance around the globe, and small ruminants are quite important, coming from a country where producers of ovines and caprines are quite important. It's something that we need to start looking at with the Code Commission for the next years.
Okay. So considering that we cannot have David back, I believe that the meeting can be finalized.
David's mentioned that he has been dropped for the panelist.
Okay. Let me see. No, I mean, nobody. Anyway, so I consider the meeting over, and I thank the participation of the panelists, and particularly also the attendees. So hope to see you back, and ICAR will send the certificate of a sort of certificate of participation, certificate of attendance to all the people who joined the meeting, and this will be the last duty. Please be aware that the ICAR website will contain soon the presentations and the video of this webinar. So all the attendees will be receiving this notification by email, and I consider that the meeting is over.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks
Nice
for
to-
thanks to the attendees.